Hello, and thank you for watching out here in the Redwoods. I'm your host, Denise Ryles. Thank you for your company. Now, ladies and gentlemen, imagine for a second that you're under a tree on a warm summer day, outside by a roaring fire, on a comfy couch inside a cabin. What I'm describing to you are places that you might find a storyteller. Back in the day, that's where we learned our history. We learned about wonderful, magnificent events that happened. And tonight, we are very pleased to introduce to you a specter, an out-of-worldly storyteller. We have many, and he's our first. Let's give a warm welcome to Carpathian. Good evening, Carpathian.
I'm still under the tree. I'm just sort of enjoying the relaxing. Good evening, Denise. How are you?
Good evening. Now, I'm not wrong about storytellers. And back in the day, you know, storytellers would go all around. Now, what interested you in coming to this physical plane? What interested you in becoming a storyteller? And what kind of stories do you tell your audience?
Well, I must confess, I had absolutely no intention of becoming a storyteller.
Oh,
It
really?
was entirely by happenstance. No, I have wandered, well, quite a while. I'm not as young as I look.
Oh.
And I'd wandered quite a bit and interacted with my human companions over the years and enjoyed their company very much. And I developed the gift, the knack of remembering, developing my memory and remembering details and events quite precisely. And it so happened that during my wanderings, I found myself here in your wonderful country. I've wandered all about the world and found myself here and found myself entertaining at a haunted house, a haunted attraction outside of the wonderfully Gothic Philadelphia area on the East Coast. Yes, I spent some time there and I took part in the attraction, and it was one of the premier events in the area. So that meant that as we got closer and closer to the Halloween season, the line would grow longer and longer, and the humans, as polite as they were, would grow more and more restless as the time went on. There were some waiting periods that took 2-3 hours before they could get into the attraction.
Oh, wow.
So with foresight that was immutable, they said, "Carpathian, go entertain the crowd." And, all right, so I went out and I decided to share a story or two I'd learned in my travels. And an amazing thing began to happen. The people in line began to come to the attraction as much to hear my stories as to see the attraction. And in fact, completely unexpectedly, when they had gone through, I would find myself entertaining and turn around to see a crowd behind me to say, "Will you tell us one more story before we leave for the night?" And I thought, oh, my goodness, here's a talent I can milk for all it's worth. I'm going to ride this wave to the beach and see what comes of it. And it was entirely by accident. But people seem to enjoy my stories. Yeah. Now, I tell all sorts of stories, but the ones they seem to enjoy and the one I seem to specialize in are tales of the macabre and the dark fantastic. I don't like the word horror, although some people, it's a perfectly fine word. Yeah. I don't like that as much because in the past few years, horror has taken on a sort of dismal and exceedingly dark sort of variance with some of the films and television. I prefer the weird tales, the uncanny, as Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft used to call them. And I prefer the dark fantastic because that can encompass the romantically macabre or the dark morality tale or simply the frightening jump story. It's a wide variety.
Wow.
Yes.
What's the most important thing for you as the storyteller to get to your audience?
I enjoy very much making a connection with everyone in the audience. I've been fortunate enough to tell in 2,000-seat auditoriums, which is splendid.
2,000 seats?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
splendid
my
to have that size audience. But I found that I prefer the coffee house and the smaller venues where I can actually do one-on-one and make eye contact with my audience. I can do that in a larger auditorium, but there's more intimacy in the smaller venue. And I can actually, if I choose to walk among them, walk among the tables, walk among the audience, and speak specifically to those who are particularly engaged in the tale. That is my favorite part of storytelling, having that immediacy. Storytelling is not printed in books, although many are today. Storytelling is not often recorded on film as you're doing. Storytelling is here and it's gone. It's a very transitory art form. And I like that immediacy and that transitory nature of having a connection with the audience and then moving along. That I enjoy very much. And if you can make that connection with the audience as you're painting the scenery with your words and your descriptions, then they're taking part in it too. They're actually doing much of the work. Their imaginations are terrifying them as much as any words that I have. I particularly enjoy when I'm telling to a group of youngsters and there will be dead silence. And then the story is finished and the spell is broken. And one will undoubtedly pipe up and say, well, I wasn't scared. Really? You certainly sat very still during that story, and you didn't seem to breathe very much, and your eyes never left me once. That's the connection I like to make, in the adults as well as the young ones.
Yeah. Yes. How does the stories of Edgar Allan Poe translate to today's audience? You've been doing this for hundreds and hundreds of years. Have you seen a progression or difference, or is this a way to keep them alive?
I think Edgar Allan Poe was an exceptional genius. If you read his stories, a small digression. E.B. White wrote a fine book, The Elements of Style, which was to help people become better writers. And one of the rules, very briefly, is simply 3 words. Avoid unnecessary words.
Oh.
That's the key to good writing. And I think good storytelling.
Yeah.
When you read Edgar Allan Poe, when he's lyrically and spinning a tale and drawing you in, there's almost a mathematical precision about it. Not one word in any of his stories is wasted. Not one word is unneeded. One of my favorite tales of his, if not my favorite, is the Cask of Amontillado, which starts out a little uneasy. The narrator's talking about how he has always hated this gentleman. He's insulted me over 1,000 times, and I've put up with it. But lately, it has gone beyond the pale, and I knew I must have revenge. No, that's all he says. But then he begins to tell the story. He goes out and he meets him, and, oh, I have a new cask of Amontillado, the finest wine. You are such a connoisseur. You can tell me if I got my money's worth. Oh, Amontillado, I have my doubt. And he leads him down into the basement of his house, down into the catacombs. And as the tale is spun, there's nothing exceptionally terrible happening. But every phrase, every word is saying something is very wrong here. Until the end of the story, where he has taken his drunken friend, chained him to a wall, and is bricking him up behind the wall. And by then, things are very, very bad.
Yes.
And the story just tightens and tightens and tightens. And that is what Poe did better than anyone. He knew how to draw you in with very simple things that, one incident that doesn't quite right, and then another, and suddenly nothing is right. Everything is wrong. And he was a master at that.
Now, do you have a different energy as you go, from H.P. Lovecraft to Edgar Allan Poe? Is there a different energy that you need to have in order to relay their stories and their personalities?
That's a very good question. I don't think so. I think once you have an audience, the biggest misconception that I have when I'm approaching an audience that's unfamiliar with storytelling is, first of all, they believe that it's going to be a children's exercise.
Oh.
And they're not going to be able to appreciate it. Or they believe, well, it's storytelling. And unfortunately, this is often put forward by some of the more traditional tellers, that it's an old tradition, an ancient tradition, an almost revered tradition. And modern audience might come believing that it's going to be boring. It's going to be as boring as any literature class you had to sit through in high school, and you're not going to appreciate it. So my first intent is to capture their attention.
Yeah.
And keep them a little off balance. And once I have their attention, I can take my time. Just as Poe would do, just as Lovecraft would do. Once they had your attention, they could take all the time in the world. And if you truly had their attention, the audience would follow you anywhere. The thing is that once you have committed the audience to your attention, you have to respect your audience, and you cannot give a short-sighted performance, a weak performance. You have to give everything that you have and every skill you have, because they're offering their attention to you that they could easily spend going to a movie or watching television.
Yeah.
So I take that very, very, that's not something I take lightly, the audience's attention, and I always want to present the best possible entertainment that I can. But once I have their attention and once I know they're following me, I can take my time and lead them anywhere I want to, hopefully to the most uncomfortable, unpleasant, macabre, and uncanny experience that they can. Yes.
Now, is there a moment in time that you still have in your memory that you still remember today?
That I still remember today as far as storytelling?
Yes. Was there a particular audience that you still remember to this very day, after all of these centuries?
All my audiences are most treasured by me, all of them. But it's a very, very good question. You ask very difficult questions, Miss Winfrey. I don't know what to make of it.
Thank you.
I
put a spell on you too, Carpathian, and now you're mine.
Yes. There have been, I'm always feel a sense of absolute reward when I can surprise an audience. When an audience gasps, when an audience lets out a verbal exclamation of some kind. I find that wonderful. And I also love the expressions of absolute enthrallment on the faces of anyone. I tell a story, a very traditional story called The Black Velvet Band, which is a favorite of a lot of my young friends, and they have shared it around the campfire themselves, but they've not heard me tell it. And I draw it in, and I'm often surprised when I get to the ending of that story, which is a surprise ending, and I won't ruin it for any of you out there. Come see me, and I'll be happy to tell you the tale. But I'm always surprised how often that tale, as well known as it is, catches people completely by surprise. A few weeks ago, I was up at Patrick's Point. I tell there every summer, once a month, June, July, and August, around the campfire, I share my ghost stories.
Nice.
And I told that story, and the audience absolutely gasped, and their jaws dropped, and I was stunned at how I had absolutely caught them off guard. Because I assume that's a very popular story.
Yeah.
Years and years ago, when I was still haunting back east, a young filmmaking friend of mine, Bob Bideman, I believe you might know
I
him.
know Bob, yes.
Yes, he was directing a series of movies featuring me and my tales.
Oh,
and
really?
we filmed the Black Velvet Band.
Oh.
And they were filming it at this homestead. The great thing about back east is there are these wonderful historical sites like Valley Forge Park and these where buildings are untouched, so they're natural settings.
Yeah.
And they were filming in that area, the Black Velvet Band. It took place a while ago. And at one point, Mr. Bideman sent everyone out for a dinner break, all in costume. Mm-hmm. And the star of the show, of the film, went down to the local delicatessen with some of the other actors, and he was enjoying the lovely young lady behind the counter. Now, I should tell you, when he read the script, he was absolutely enthralled. He did not see the ending coming. He was just stunned.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, my goodness. Are you going to... It's stunning. And so he was there at the delicatessen, and the young lady said, "Oh, are you part of historical reenactment of some kind?" He said, "No, actually, we're filming a movie." "Oh, what are you filming?" And he said, "Well, it's called the Black Velvet Band." And the girl said, "Oh, is that the one about the girl that wears the black band around her throat and the man?" And she told the whole story to him. And he stomped back to the set, and he walked up to me and he said, "Carpathian, does everyone in the world know this story but me?" And I said, "Yes, Kevin, everyone in the world knows the story except for you, but now you know it as well.
Yeah.
So you're not as bereft as you were when you started."
He was missing out on
He
something.
was missing out on everything. But that is what I enjoy, is a lot of people are unfamiliar with it, and he was as stunned as anyone in the audience watching when he first read it.
Oh, funny. I love it.
Yes.
Now, how does one get a story through the camera lens when you're so used to having the audience around you and you can use the tone, use body language? How do you do that through the film?
Well, I do
Camera.
the same thing with the camera as I would with it. I would imagine that I'm speaking to the audience, and looking at the camera and speaking to someone directly there watching and nodding to them, gesturing to them. And it's the same sort of thing, but you don't quite have the feedback that you do with an audience. And indeed, as much as I've enjoyed filming and being on television or on film, I do enjoy the live audience most of all. That is my first love and my true love, and that is where I will always, I can't imagine any time I will not be performing for a live audience until I fade away and I'm gone.
Well, hopefully that's for many more centuries to come.
We can only hope.
You can
Although
only
some hope much sooner than others. But, yeah.
So how do you keep the stories fresh? Yourself.
It's interesting. I have a repertoire of easily 100 stories, but I don't tell them all the time.
Right.
And I used to be very concerned about not, again, capturing the audience and not boring the audience.
Right.
And I had an astonishing experience at the Humboldt County Library a few Halloweens ago when I was performing there.
Ooh, what a place to have a story.
Splendid time. I've been invited back there several times, and I usually do their family literacy night. So we not only tell stories, but we pass out books to the youngsters and encourage them to read.
Good.
Reading is so important.
Yes.
So important to read for children and for adults as well. If there are some who have not taken upon themselves the opportunity to read as much as they'd like, I encourage them, read everything you can get their hands on. It is such a special gift to be able to lose yourself in a tale. But I've always been concerned about boring my audiences. And
But what about boring yourself?
Well, this is part of the tale. I always want to have new stories for audiences that come back again and again.
Yeah.
So I had prepared on this night brand new stories, all brand new stories that no one had ever heard, and I was going to entertain them. I had practiced them. I was very fond of them. I thought they would enjoy them. And I stood before this crowd and I said, what sort of story would you like to hear? And what I usually mean by that is, would you like a funny story, or a scary story, or a sad story, or a love story, anything? And one young person stood up and quite specifically said, can you tell the Black Velvet Band? Of course, you are the audience. Your wish is my command. So I told that story, and right away other hands went up and, could you tell the Ghost Catcher, which is another story I enjoy? And can you tell the Headless Horseman? Of course. I didn't tell one brand new story that night. I told all favorites they'd heard before,
Yeah.
and I thought about that. And I realized that even though they may have heard them again and again, well, it's like if you go to a concert, say, Frank Sinatra, and he does not sing New York, New York.
Yeah.
Or he doesn't, or go see a Bruce Springsteen concert and he doesn't sing Born to Run. Yes, everyone has heard it 1,000 times. The audience can sing along, but they want to hear him do that song.
Right.
And I realized it's the same way with stories. They're not really boring. They want to hear me tell that tale. And in that same way, if they're enjoying it, then I'm not bored at all either. There are certain stories that are my favorite to tell. And then there's some stories I have not told in a while, and someone will say, Carpathian, you haven't told the Church of the Dead in a long time. Why, no, I haven't. So I'll begin to tell that one again and let some other ones slip off into the back. So I change them out, and that keeps them interesting, exciting, and I'm always looking for new ones, and that keeps them interesting. But I do have some favorites that are my Born to Run, that are my New York, New York, that I could tell as many times, and I never get tired of them either.
Right.
Yes.
Well, have you written any yourself?
Oh, yes. I have told some. There are some that I tell that are original tales.
Really?
Yes. And I enjoy that. I enjoyed finding the old tales that have been told many, many times. I enjoy finding the humorous tale that makes me laugh. I enjoy when my young friends come up to me, or my older friends, more mature, let us say, come up to me after a show and say, have you ever heard the story about? Why, no. And I love hearing new tales myself. I'm as much an audience as they are, because I enjoy the art of storytelling myself.
Yeah.
I enjoy hearing something fresh and new, and that's how I add to my repertoire. But I do also create some original ones that idea will come to me, such as, what if there was a lovely vampire in an old Irish village who was a musician?
Ooh, I want to
And
hear
all
that
she
story.
asked of the people of the village is to let her feed occasionally. In return, she would gift them with this wonderful music from the harp. What would happen then? Or I told a story from a young human friend that used to come to hear our stories dressed as a vampire, and her name was Ruby. And so I created a story for her, Ruby, the littlest vampire, who didn't really feel like she fit in with the other vampires, but learned that, fitting in isn't always so important. Being yourself, being true to who you are is the most important thing. So I do the occasional tale.
Nice. And that's the purpose of some of the stories, too. No matter what genre, there's always a lesson.
Yes. And
I like that. It's okay to be the strangest vampire. It's okay not to fit in. You're right. And give them a little confidence, a little validation.
Yes.
To your audience.
Yes, indeed. All of my stories, if I'm troubled by any trend in current dark fantasy, it's the tendency towards nihilism and absolute, I don't want to say immorality, but amorality. Now, sometimes that's very effective. At the end of the classic Night of the Living Dead, the hero who has survived that terrible night looks through the window and he has killed himself because he's mistaken for one of the dead. There's a place for that. There's a place for the unhappy ending. But it seems today that that's all there is.
Right.
And I don't like mayhem without a reason, or
Oh,
nihilism
mayhem with-
without,
yeah.
without a serious payoff at the end of the story. So all my tales, even the dark ones, even the sad ones, have a moral to them. In fact, one of my friends who runs a haunted attraction in Atlanta dubbed me macabre with a moral.
Macabre
and I
with a
wear
moral?
that proudly, yes.
Oh, I love it.
Thank you.
I'm so glad to have you here.
Oh, it's a pleasure being here.
And you are seen all around Humboldt County.
I'm seen as far too often around Humboldt County, and I'm sure in some instances. May I tell you a good story?
Absolutely.
A quick story before we go. One of the places that I performed is the medieval fairs that come to town.
Yes.
And I do try to make an impression when I enter a room.
Of course
so
you
I
do.
was wandering about, and I've been doing it for a while. I was wandering about, and I was walking along a row of tents, and this young girl came around the corner, and she saw me, and she stopped dead, and she shrieked, "A ghost!" And she ran back around the corner, and I could hear a babble of other little girls' voices, 5 or 6 or 7. "There's a ghost!" And they all came around the corner, and they stopped. And one little girl said, "Oh, that's just Carpathian." And they all turned and walked away. Nothing interesting here at all, no. One thing about your audience is they let you know what you're worth.
That's
yes.
right.
Mhm.
Well, to us, you're worth $1 million.
Oh,
then
that's very
some.
kind of you. Of
This
course,
is-
$1 million doesn't go as far as it used to, you know.
I know. So now it's got to be $2 million. And I hope to see you again sometime very soon.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here.
You're welcome. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you've been watching Out Here in the Redwoods with my good friend, Carpathian. Now, Carpathian,
Yes.
let's travel with you through the television lens
Oh, my goodness.
to the graveyard.
Hope
Will
we
you
don't break the
entertain us
glass.
there for the
Certainly.
story? Well, thank you, Carpathian. And thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Greetings, my friends. This is Carpathian, out here in the Redwoods with my human companions. You know I enjoy spending time with the living. Yes, they're alive, but no one's perfect. But if you are among the living, you might want to consider a fine website called Patreon.com. Out here in the Redwoods is there, as well as other artists and other people who are looking for patronage, looking for your support. I'm sure they would be most grateful, as I would be most grateful, to remember humans do not live on the dead alone. They live on your support, on your guidance, on your donations. They would be grateful, and so would I. And believe me, it's good to have friends in other places.